Hi and good afternoon. My name is Coral Smith from Matrix Business Growth Consultancy. I am here today to talk you through the webinar, Why 80% of Learning Slips, How to Form New Workplace Habits, and some of the trends around peer feedback in the workplace. Welcome to those that have joined the call this afternoon. We are still waiting on a few people to join, and we will see if they join as we go along. So just to get started, I will introduce myself. My name's Coral Smith. I work with Matrix Business Growth Consultancy as a consultant. I have a background in human resources as well as working with learning and development and HR within a large global engineering company previously, and now work with Matrix, working with growing businesses throughout Scotland and helping them to develop and progress. I am also an executive business coach and specialise in career coaching and career development, as well as a cognitive behavioural therapist. This presentation and webinar has been developed with my colleague David McCarran, who's the founding partner of Matrix Business Growth Consultancy. So let's get started with an overview of what we are going to cover today. We're going to cover learning transfer and talk about what learning transfer to the workplace means, as well as looking at some of the trends around evaluation of learning development activities. So what's happening within the arena of learning development and how organisations are really finding out whether their learning development activities are successful or not. We're going to look at habits and how habits are formed, as well as looking at how you can replace unwanted habits with more positive habits for the workplace. We're also going to go on and have a look at behaviour change and how you continue to change behaviour while sustaining momentum, and look at some tips for effective feedback. We will be making the webinar interactive, so there'll be some polls for you to give us some feedback and also getting you to post some questions as we go. And when we get a chance, we will respond to some of your questions during the session. So hopefully we'll be able to answer some of the questions that you have this afternoon. So first of all, let's get started looking at learning transfer. Development is much more than training alone. The training may give individuals the how to develop a certain behaviour or skill, but it does not guarantee effective performance or business results being put into practice. It's now more widely accepted that actually it's just 20% of what is learned from a formal learning intervention, learning development programme, traditional training programme is still being applied 12 months after the event. So what we found out here is that 80% of what is learned actually slips, and if you're lucky, just 20% of what is learned during a training program actually sticks. When we talk about transfer of learning, transfer of training, it's actually been defined as the extent of retention and application of knowledge, skills and attitudes from a training environment to the workplace environment. So in other words, transfer of training is the degree to which the individuals effectively apply the learning from a training context to the job. That definition was taken from the International Training Journal. So what we're talking about here when we talk about learning times transfer equals results. Lots of individuals can go and learn different things. They may build the knowledge, they may build the skills, but it's only when it's put into practice at work that actually it can impact the results and the performance of what the individual is doing. Of course, something we're going to talk about today is workplace behaviours. So looking at changes in work behaviours as a result of a training intervention or training activity does indicate transfer. So that's one of the things we're going to have a look at today. Although something to really drive home for our attendees today is for performance improvement to actually take place, there needs to be a number of factors in place. And we found that through our experience of working with lots of different companies, developing individuals and developing the performance of the organisation. The things that need to be in place are a positive organisational climate and culture that supports development. There, of course, needs to be line manager, supervisor support for the individual to continue to develop and continue to learn. And there, of course, needs co-worker support. So the individuals, the peers that they're working with, need to support them in order for them to stay motivated and sustain the learning and development journey that they've been on. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is ask you how your organisation actually measures the effectiveness of learning development activities. Going to poll the attendees just now to see what your feedback is. So without further ado, let's just get this poll over to you. So what does your organisation do to measure the effectiveness of learning development activities? If you could have a read through those, and once we've got the results in, I will share those. Just waiting on a couple of more respondees. Okay, going to close the poll shortly for those that have polled. And I'll just share the results with you to see what the attendees have said. Okay, so just a quick poll. What does your organisation do to measure the effectiveness of learning development activities? Well, 75% of you said nothing at all. So that says to me that you're either not doing learning and development activities, or you're certainly not measuring the effectiveness of those learning and development activities. 25% of you said that you look for feedback from participants, which is quite a common one, and also 25% said we evaluate the change in knowledge skills of participants. So that's the feedback that we have. So let's see what the results of the CIPD Learning and Development Survey tell us. So what were the findings from the CIPD? From the group, the majority, 75% of you that are on attendance of the webinar today, have said that your organisation doesn't do anything to measure the effectiveness. What we see from the feedback from the CIPD is that learner and manager reflection and feedback are the most commonly used tools and methods to assess the effectiveness of L&D interventions. They do see some sector differences in the methods used. The private sector being reported that they're more likely to use business metrics rather than organisational and other sort of sectors. Those who generally focus their evaluations on measuring participant satisfaction are less likely to use all the other methods listed compared with looking at the transfer of learning. What we've also found through this research is the more aligned learning and development is with the business strategy, the more likely the organisations are to use other evaluation methods, such as looking at behaviour changes of participants, what we're going to talk about today, and also a wider impact on business and society for how organisations are assessing the effectiveness of learning development. Here you will see from the survey in a bit more detail that learner and reflection feedback and manager reflection feedback is still the most common. And we find that in the work that we do as organisational development and learn development specialists, that many companies still stick to having, for want of a better term, happy sheets issued at the end of sessions where the individual can self-report whether they enjoyed a development activity or a programme. And they're generally, within some organisations, there's less focus on actually how is the individual going to put into practice the skills and knowledge that they've acquired in that time. So why is learning transfer so difficult? Let's just have a look at some of the things that we see as reported as to why learning transfer, taking your learning, your skills, your development, and putting it into practice. The things that we find, the individuals can be really motivated, they've maybe had a coaching session, they're quite action focused, or they've been on a sustained development program, learning lots of different things, but they can quickly lose momentum. They start to lack motivation after a period of time. There's a lack of clear action planning or accountability for them to put into practice what they've actually learned, so they're not held accountable by anybody. There's no specific development plan associated with the things that they learn. There's a lack of coaching and feedback on how they're actually getting on. It's some of the challenges that we hear. And here's a really common one. They're just too busy doing the day-to-day stuff. So they've maybe been released from the work to go and do some development, taken some time, and have been really motivated, but they go back into the workplace and then it becomes almost business as usual, getting their head down and just focusing on doing the day-to-day rather than to work on the things that they really need to work on. And it's so easy, let's face it, it's easy to slip into past habits, things that we're more comfortable with, rather than pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone to do something different. And there's also, it can be that there's a lack of support and encouragement for others. So if we're feeling demotivated, we're finding it hard to continue to develop and learn new skills and behaviours, it seems like it's just too tough, then you know, the support of others around us can really spur us on when we need it the most. So let's just have another look at a poll. What is the most commonly used development practice in your organisation? Just have a look at this and we can compare it to some of the trends elsewhere. I'm going to launch the poll just now for you, if you could complete the question. So, which is the most commonly used development practice in your organisation? Coaching by peers and managers, on-the-job training, in-house development programmes, or e-learning courses? If you could pick the most commonly used one, you might use a number of these, but just if you select which one. Just waiting on a couple more votes coming in and then we'll close it and share the results with you. So here we go. So what we found from polling the participants, that 67% have said that on-the-job training is the most common, followed by, it's equal measures again, 17% in-house development programs and 17% e-learning courses. And of course, all of these development activities have a place within many different organisations. But it's interesting to see that actually coaching by peers and managers, there's 0%, so this isn't a common thing that organisations have done. So let's see what the results are from research done by the CIPD and what their feedback is. Let's just have a look at that. So what we found here from the CIPD is that the results tell us that, similar to the participants on today's session, that they find on-the-job training certainly the most common and also the most effective development activity. And the reason I would say that's the case is that we know that in order to develop individuals, then they have to have experience and practice, and actually putting into practice certain behaviours gives them the opportunity to really instill the knowledge that they have. Rather than just showing something, it's actually letting them have a go of it, and that's where they can really develop. So what are the other things that these results tell us? That in-house programs are certainly still very popular and the most common, and also quite effective. But when we have a look at the effectiveness rating, we see that on-the-job training is still said to be the most common and most effective. However, coaching by line managers or peers isn't as common as in-house development programs, but is said to be more effective. So that's telling us that companies are looking at different ways of using coaching by line managers or peers to develop individuals, and that's where they see it being most effective. So let's talk about motivation and habit now. So motivation helps us to get started on a development journey. And often, as we've said, we see individuals who have gone through some sort of development program or activity, and they're really motivated. So it's actually having a habit that keeps it going, because we can all be motivated, but unless we continue to do something and continue to put it into practice, our motivation can quickly wane away and disappear. So how does habit play a role in development? We are going to talk you through how habits are formed and the tools for developing new behaviours and skills. We've found through the research that we've been looking at as well is that our brains chunk information, and so it looks to convert a sequence of actions into an automatic routine, for example. So when we think about ourselves today, maybe we're car drivers and we were looking to reverse our cars out of our driveway before setting off to work today or wherever we were going. Before we became accomplished at this and before we had lots of experience of driving, being able to just reverse your car out of the driveway would have taken major concentration. So all the things that we would have had to have thought about to reverse the car out of the driveway, we would have had to unlock the car, adjust the seat, insert the key into the ignition, turn the key to the right place to get the car started. We'd be looking in the mirrors constantly, making sure we put it in the right gear, making sure we put it in reverse and not going forward is one of the key things. Removing the foot off the brake, taking the handbrake off, gauging the distance and speed to reverse, checking it's clear, continuing to check, reversing it out, checking it's clear, etc. That sounds like so much of an activity to do to actually reverse the car out of the driveway. However, millions of people perform this task every single morning, but for the majority of us, the activity is now automatic. We don't have to think about unlocking the car, we press the button automatically. We automatically put the car in reverse, where we check our mirrors, yeah, but it's something that we do really without having to think consciously about it. And what scientists have found is that habits come about because our brains are constantly looking for ways to save effort and energy so that we can focus on the things that we really need to focus on. So in effect, we are looking for an easy way to get through life so we're not having to consciously think about it. So let's have a look at some of this research in practice around habit, and then we'll go on to have a look at actually, what does that mean for us in the workplace when we're looking at developing ourselves or developing our teams and getting them to develop new skills and behaviours? There was research conducted and it was looking at how mice formed habits. And this research involved where scientists put mice into what we call a mouse maze, and they set the maze up in such a way that there was chocolate hidden in a certain location in the maze. The maze became opened with a click, so it allowed the mouse to enter the actual maze and go in and find its way around. Of course, when the mouse was first put into the maze, it went down dead ends, it went around, sniffing around all the different places of the maze, and it took much longer for it to actually find the chocolate. However, what the scientists found was that when the mouse was put into this position repeatedly, so it was allowed to go into the maze, it heard the click, it would then find a routine, and once it had located the chocolate a couple of times, it then formed a habit as to, it heard the click, it would go into the maze, and then it would know the route it would take for it to find the chocolate much more quickly. So where the mouse has developed a routine, therefore it knew how to find its way around the maze very quickly to then find the chocolate. It had a cue. The cue to go into its routine of going into the maze was the click, the sound of the maze opening, and this was followed by it going into the routine and then finding the reward, which was the chocolate, which I'm sure all of us enjoy. For the mouse, hearing the click and getting the routine and the reward was reinforcing the behaviours that it was doing something right. They did have some fun with the mouse, so they would play a different noise of a cat meowing to disrupt the routine, and they found that the mouse would stop the routine of going to the chocolate so quickly because of the disruption to the habit that they had. So you might well ask, how does this impact us as humans when we think about the habit loop? Well, here's another example, taking it from from many of our lives often. If we're thinking about how to develop new, healthier lifestyles, habits where we want to become more fit, more active, then we'll be looking for ways to have a cue for being able to be more healthy in our lives. So if we want to become more active by running, for example, more frequently, then the cue that we might have for ourselves is committing to a friend that we are going to go out and exercise, for example. Or we might have our gym kit with us, so we don't have excuses for us on the way home from work, so we've got our equipment with us. Or there's other cues that we can set for ourselves. Then we have to get into the routine of keeping fit and keeping active. So we have to develop the habit in some way so that we force ourselves to continue to get out and stay active. And then we have to have some sort of reward. So when you think about this habit loop of developing a more healthy lifestyle, which many of us aspire to, we have the cues. We develop the routine and the reward. So say, for example, it's becoming fitter. The cues for us, as we've said, are maybe having our gym kit with us. We go out running, and the reward is that we start to feel good. We might lose some weight. We might feel more energetic about ourselves, therefore developing a new habit. Some of you may have heard the myth that it takes 21 days to form a habit. What we've actually found through our research and what we've done is research taken from the University College in London, going back to about 2010, aimed to look at getting to the bottom of how long does it really take to develop a habit. And the study tracked around 100 people over a 12-week period as they attempted to make daily health lifestyle changes. Each participant chose a dietary or some other kind of activity, like, drinking a glass of water every so often after breakfast, and then they had to report how habitual something felt, how automatic something felt, until it actually became more natural to them. So what they actually found was that for the average individual, it took around specifically 66 days on average of repeated practice of a particular behaviour, a new behaviour, for it to feel automatic, for it to feel natural. So if you think about developing habits at work where it's new behaviours that are new to us, then it takes on average a couple of months of repeated practice and conscious practice for something to start to feel more automatic. So let's have a look at an example that would be in the workplace. So using this example, say for looking at this one, we would like to develop more active listening skills, then that's a particular routine that we would like to get into. But before we can establish the routine and get a reward, we're looking for a cue, something that is going to prompt us to look at developing that routine of active listening. So the cue for this sort of thing might be having a live development plan, having coaching sessions where you're accountable for that particular development need. And then you need to start to practice active listening and working with it almost on a daily basis to develop that particular skill. In order to develop the healthy habit that we have there, we need to have some sort of reward. So the reward for developing active listening might be recognition from your line manager to say that you're doing well on developing that particular thing. It might be feedback from your team that's encouraging you to say that you're doing really well because you've developed that particular skill. Whatever it is, it's important that it's, that there's a continued practice of a particular routine. So what we're looking at here, it takes 66 days on average until a behaviour has reached the peak levels of feeling automatic for an individual. The news about bad habits. Your brain cannot tell the difference between good and bad habits. Take time management, for instance. Individuals get into bad habits of checking and responding to emails as and when the ping happens, and I can be guilty of that too. So it's almost going back to Pavlov dogs type psychology, where we hear the ping, we look at the email, we then decide whether to deal with it or not, we then become distracted for what we're doing. That's quite a bad habit to get into, and it means that we're getting sidetracked and having less productivity in the workplace. This habit that we've developed has become a learned kind of habit. We've developed that habit over a period of time, and it can be a problem. The thing about habits that we've had in the past is that your brain can't tell the difference between good and bad habits, so it's always searching for the cue and the reward around the habit that's there. Just to give you a case study, looking back to a company that was called Alco Steel that were based in the US, had quite a challenging safety culture where they had quite a difficult safety record where individuals were getting hurt at work. It was quite a high-risk type of industry. And the new chief executive officer developed a new safety culture which was based on the habit loop. They identified the cue for habit, which was an employee injury. So if anybody was injured whilst at work, they were then required to report it to the president, the unit president, and the chief executive officer within 24 hours. The reward that was in place for individuals were only those who embraced the system got promoted and got recognition. So this is a live example within a workplace where developing a safety culture, having the cues, routine and reward in place was established for this organisation known as Alco Steel. So just a reminder there, keep calm, only 66 days to go. At least I am not saying to you that it takes 1,000 repetitions or 10,000 repetitions in the case of Malcolm Gladwell's book to actually become automatic and perfected at something. But what we are recognising here, based on the significant amount of research done around habits, is it takes time, effort and consistent practice to be able to develop new habits and skills. So let's go on to have a look at the steps to create behaviour change. So we've covered the 66 days, looking at the research conducted of developing habits over a period of time, recognizing that habit development it's not an event, it's not a one-off of sending somebody to a workshop and then suddenly they return to the place of work and they start to perform at the next level. There needs to be cues and practice in place for individuals to continue to develop and sustain the momentum around developing new habits and behaviours. And of course, there needs to be ample opportunities for them to practice. They might say practice makes perfect or practice makes automatic. The other thing that we look for in creating behaviour change is positive reinforcement. So that's having positive recognition for when somebody is doing really well at something and continuing to develop a new behaviour skill. And this goes way back to theories from even the 1960s. There was an individual, B.F. Skinner, and he was really influenced by Pavlov and also Thorndike, who were behavioural psychologists. And they looked at the behaviour of individuals, and the theories that were put in place were if individuals were recognised for things that they did that were positive, so therefore other people gave them recognition, then the chances are they were much more likely to repeat the behaviour. So this is something to think about. In order to create behaviour change, it's not just a case of, as we know, sending individuals onto a training programme. From the feedback that we've had from yourselves on the webinar and also from the research conducted by the CIPD, we've found that for individuals to really impact behaviour change and organisational performance, there needs to be a number of factors in place. There needs to be the time and continued practice of those individuals developing the behaviours. There needs to be cues and practice in place, and there needs to be some element of recognition that they're staying on track. All of this behaviour change doesn't work in isolation without having goal setting. So we're going to go on to have a look at what are the tips and things that you need to do to make goal setting effective, to make practice effective, and also positive reinforcement. And when I say positive reinforcement, I mean feedback and also peer feedback. And all of these things combined together can really increase learning transfer, retention. And if we go back to the beginning, when we talk about learning transfer, we mean the taking of new skills, behaviours, and having them applied in the workplace so that they can positively impact on performance. So let's have a look at goal setting. So what do we find here? Well, there's a lot of research out there around goal setting and having clear goals. It's important that the individual has clarity, knowing what they want to achieve and being able to visualize it in practice. It's important also that goals are set up in such a way that it's step by step, breaking the goals down into manageable steps and chunks. We know how difficult it is ourselves when we have a goal or a vision that just seems so intangible, so difficult, whereas we can really build our confidence in developing ourselves by having these goals broken down into step-by-step action steps. Having SMART goals, and what we mean by SMART goals is specific goals, so you know what it is that you want to achieve. They're measurable, so you can actually measure the difference in how you're doing. They're achievable. First of all, you don't want to have completely stretched goals that seem impossible to achieve. They need to be realistic as well, and they need to be timed. So you need to have a time cutoff placed on you so that you can make sure that you strive to meet these goals. The other element is sharing your goals with others. By doing this, if you share your goals with others, it helps to build commitment when you know others know what you're working on. It helps others to know what support and encouragement you need, going back to some of the reasons why learning transfer is so difficult. So if you share your goals and what you're working on, your behaviours with those around you and other people, then that can help them to know what support you need. The other element to that is when you know that others know what you're working on, it will be in your mind to think about, okay, they may ask me how I'm progressing, so the chances are you will stay more focused on those particular goals. The other thing is accountability. So you should be accountable for what goals you're trying to achieve, that you are responsible for making things happen, and therefore you should have an input into your goals. For those of you that have ever been in the unfortunate situation where you've just had a goal given to you, or a project or task or something that's going to really stretch you that you haven't engaged with or you haven't bought into, it's much more challenging to really strive towards that goal than if you've set the goal yourself. So that's getting you to think about how can you make your goals clearer, how can you break them down into step-by-step manageable chunks, how can you make them smart, and how can you make sure that you're sharing them with others and also having accountability for the goals yourself. Let's have a look at practice now. It's important to have an opportunity in an environment where you can practice new behaviours and skills. After all, what we say, practice makes perfect, or practice makes automatic. Shaping behaviours can be often complex in nature. For example, for those individuals who would like to develop a better coaching style, then there's a number of things to think about if it's not something that they're used to. They need to get used to asking open-ended questions, for example, who, what, why, where and when. If it's your natural style to jump in and offer solutions and suggestions because you want to be helpful, then that might not be a natural coaching style for an individual. You need to develop active listening skills as well as clarifying. So putting all of these skills together in order to develop your coaching skills, it can be often too complex to do in one session. So in order to practice this, you might start to practice your open-ended questioning capability in a workplace setting. And then you might continue to practice your active listening skills or clarifying skills. And then once you can sort of put all of these different skills together and competencies together, that's when you can become more proficient at putting it together overall. So when we talk about positive feedback, why do we look at positive feedback? Again, it's positive feedback is much more encouraging than having negative feedback, and we've looked at how that can go back to reinforcing positive behaviours. I'll give you an example here. For an individual who might be working on having more effective and influencing communication skills at their team meetings, they may try a different approach. So they try a different approach from what they're normally used to. They do a lot more preparation. They really get into the hearts and the minds of the attendees to think about, well, what's really going to interest them about these type of topics, and how can I put it across more clearly, more effectively, and much more influencing. And we're just looking at how that can be done more effectively. So thinking about positive feedback in terms of development, then it's much better to have positive feedback and positive recognition when individuals are developing behaviours so that they can sustain the motivation and momentum. So just having a look here in terms of the final tip for continuous behavioural development, it's looking at don't leave feedback until maybe 6 months or 12 months after the actual event. What we found is for individuals to really stay on track with their development, they should be advised at the time and given feedback at the time. So what we've had a look at is crowdsourcing of feedback and peer feedback, and feedback being given in real time. Gone are the days for a number of organisations are the traditional annual appraisal reviews, where they wait 6 to 12 months for individuals to come along to an annual appraisal and then give them feedback at that time. Many more organisations are looking for ways to have real-time feedback so that it can be given as and when the behaviours observed by individuals that they work with. So that's a lot of stuff for us to cover. We've covered a number of things so far during the session today. I'm just going to have a look at any questions that we have coming into the session and that we've got. Just have a look here. Some individuals just wondering if they'll receive copies of the slides afterwards. Certainly, that can be something that we can send along with the recording of the content that will be sent over to the individuals as well. Just having a look at some of the other things that we've got there. Okay, so how do you use feedback effectively at work? So one of the things that we have looked at is setting up a feedback culture, and it's something that takes time and effort to develop individuals in that particular area. So for example, if you're encouraging individuals to develop a feedback culture within the organisation, then it should be a reciprocal process. So it's not good enough just for you to sort of constantly seek out feedback from others. You should be in a position where you are able to observe others and provide them with feedback as well. So if you want to post any other questions that are coming through, then when we get a chance towards the end of the session, we can have a look at those as well. Just moving on to the tips for effective feedback. So just to summarise for you, for effective feedback, it should be done in real time. There is no point giving feedback, as we said, 6 to 12 months after the event has happened. It's good for effective feedback for it to be done quickly, ideally at the time of the event, so that the individual can relate it back to the actual behaviours that they were putting into practice. It shouldn't be just from one individual that you get feedback. Ideally, you'd be looking for feedback from a group of people that you work with. So your peers can be anybody from, of course, your line manager to the people that you work alongside, to other project groups that you're working within your company, as well as even customers, for example, can give you feedback on how you're working with them if you're in a customer-facing role. The comments for feedback should be related to observed behaviours, things that individuals would actually see. It should be ongoing over a period of, we would say, at least 2 to 3 months. So it's not just isolated feedback. And of course, it should be focused on being honest and also positive for having effective feedback. So just to see if there's any more questions coming in from the group. See the question that's come in there. Any other questions? No, that's okay. We're going to move on to the next session for looking at the criteria for effective feedback. It's not just good enough to give feedback. There's got to be credibility from the individuals that are actually giving you the feedback for you to take it on board, or you have to be credible when you're giving feedback as well. This should be a trusting relationship, that the feedback is coming with good intentions and from a good place. And also the timing and circumstance of giving feedback is important. Where possible, it should be interactive, simple, clear, and also helpful to the recipient. There's no point in just giving feedback for the sake of feedback. It should be helpful and constructive in some way. So here's some tips on that. So you might well ask, Matrix Business Growth Consultancy have been involved in organisation and learning development for a number of years, for over 25 years. We work with thousands of individuals and hundreds of companies to develop their organizations and develop them. So we have actually developed an app and a system that combines all of the things that we've talked about. So thinking of an app where your team can share positive feedback and give real-time honest prompts on new skills and behaviours. And it's called Peer Prompt, this system that we've actually developed that can help get prompts from your colleagues on how you're developing. So how does it work? Here's a quick overview. You select your co-workers, so these are your peers, your line manager, the people that you work with in the system, for those individuals who you want to get feedback from. You identify the skills and the behaviours that you want to develop. So this example on the screen we have here looks at delegation, for example, might be quite a common skill for individuals to develop as they go through the organisation. So before starting a task, they identify what can be developed and through delegation, and develop a plan to delegate effectively. They can also look at effective meeting management, coaching, and developing others. Whatever the skills and behaviours are that you or your team would like to develop, these can be plugged into Peer Prompt into the system. And the individual can identify what those are. You're then asked to do a quick self-assessment. So this gets you to really reflect on where you are on your development. And this is a scale of 1 to 7, where you think you are and where you're progressing. So you do a self-assessment at the beginning of what we call the cycle. And of course, given what we've talked about on the webinar today, the cycle would last for around 2 months, 2 to 3 months, because it takes that amount of time of repetition of the behaviour for it to feel more automatic and for it to develop into a really positive habit. So you self-assess at the start, the middle, and the end of the process, asking you to do some self-reflection there, which is always important. And then, of course, you get feedback. So your colleagues that you've invited to give you feedback can give you positive prompts when they see you doing things really well for your development needs. So they've recognised that maybe you've been delegating more effectively, or that you've been coaching more effectively, and they can certainly give you prompts through the system, which is an app, an online tool that can be accessed through your smartphone, your laptop, your iPad, and they can give you the feedback in real time. There's an element of gamification in the system, so you have your report, so you can see how many prompts you're getting and also the comments. There's also a company report that's available for the company, and there's some gamifications to the individuals that are giving feedback. And the feedback is anonymous in the system. Do get badge recognition back to them to recognise when they're giving feedback and taking their time to recognise what others are doing. So how can Peer Prompt be used? Well, Peer Prompt can be used as a part of an existing leadership, management, or employee development program to help sustain the impact of the knowledge development and skills and make sure that the individuals are putting it into practice. It can be a standalone development tool linked to outcomes from appraisals or reviews. It can be used to improve the impact of individual coaching programs. And it can be used to embed workplace culture, values, and behaviours. So using that example, individuals could all have the same number of development areas and the same behaviours assigned to them, which are the agreed company behaviours, and then everybody can be working on those particular behaviours to continue to develop them. Peer Prompt has been used in over 60 different companies, and we've been using this system. It's been on the go for a couple of years now, since 2014. So what are the results that we found? We found that Peer Prompt certainly increases the level of management activity in priority development areas, having on average around 180 prompts per group. There is a wide range of peers engaged and involved in the ongoing development. So for each program, you have maybe 70 people engaged in the overall process. So it may be that there's a number of individuals who are working on their development, but there's a much wider group of peers who are giving feedback on the individual's development. And on average, there's a 70% improvement rated by peers in the effectiveness of individual development areas. So this is actually the individuals, peers, their colleagues, who are saying that they see, on average, a 70% improvement in the behaviours and the development. So that is peer prompt and how we've combined all of our knowledge in terms of developing habits at work and developing behaviour change, and combined it into an interactive, simple to use app and online tool. So how do you create a feedback culture? Just to think about that. Well, first of all, individuals need to understand how and why a feedback culture is important. And then you need some ongoing commitment for them to continue to give feedback. It's not just enough implementing an app or a tool and having it there and then thinking that that will create an environment in itself for feedback. Feedback should be delivered in real time. It shouldn't be left to 6 to 12 months after an event. And it should be a reciprocal process. So not only do you seek out to get feedback, you also give back by giving feedback to others as well. It's important to have goal setting and that goals are refreshed on a regular basis and kept up to date. It's not just a case of having a development plan that's in a drawer and then left until 6 to 12 months after, when you're held to account as to how you've done in developing yourself and/or your team. And you have to really engage with others for it to be successful. To find out more, you can contact myself at Matrix, either through the website www.matrixuk.com, or to find out more about peer prompt, go to www.peerprompt.com.